In my days, when I was young, we used to be the heroes raiding the dungeon. Then there was a generation of games in which sometimes you would design the dungeon, some of the times you would be the boss monster, handling, managing the dungeon. Now, not even that. Now you are the person who cleans the dungeon, who is there shoveling the dragon's poop, and most importantly, you had to keep the monsters in. You're the janitor or some other, let's call them intermediate jobs, not the hero, not the not the dungeon master. And your job is to keep the monsters inside the dungeon. So Paperbag Dungeon is a solitaire, mainly solitaire. You can play co-op. Solitaire mainly game that is about, well, a dungeon, and you are the janitor or the warden. In any case, there's a humorous take there, and Paperbag is, I assume, from the color of the cards, because they look like they have been drawn on a paper bag. It comes with this nice little box that also works as a player aid. Then you have the rules that are printed on these cards, and it can be played in one of several modes. Again, janitor and warden being probably the main modes. You have an intro mode in which you ignore basically everything that is printed on these cards, with the exception of just the tunnels, and what's the point in that. The janitor and the warden add more effects, and there's something really nice and really smart, because you can see you have a lot of humorous illustration, fun illustrations with traps, sleeping giants, but you don't have icons, you don't have obvious gimmick functions, you don't have obvious things such as numbers or different kinds of mon and stuff. So it's very neat, because the illustrations, however, have those in-game functions, meaning depending on the mode that you're playing, some things will matter. So these tunnels here may matter. The gems may be decorations in some modes, but they are game effects in other modes. The goblins are just standing there in some modes, but they are important in other modes. So it's very neat that the illustrations are activated for game functions depending on the mode that you're playing. Also, I should mention the cards are double-sided, and it's super important. And so when you're randomizing your deck, you will probably want to mix them up and get a little messy that way. You will play with a variable number of cards. The more cards you decide to use, the harder the game becomes and the longer it takes, and also the larger the surface that you will need. And you will probably want to play on the floor or on a large table, because you do not know exactly how big your dungeon is going to be. I'm going to tell you about the game in the janitor and maybe some of the rules of the warden mode. So you always start with the door of the dungeon being placed on the table. The idea is that your dungeon will grow, and then each turn you will check if there are monsters on the board. You trace a line, because it will try to reach that door. If a monster manages to reach that door, then you flip the card, and now the door is open. If a monster is able to reach an open door, they escape the dungeon, and you get in trouble with the dungeon master because you failed your job of keeping the monsters in. Other game effects will allow you to flip cards that will allow you, for example, to close an open door, but also to basically kill a monster. The dungeon master seems to be more worried that the monster will leave rather than you kill them. So, for example, if this card is showing and I have a game effect that flips the card, then it will show the card without the monster. In this case, the monster is not killed. In other cases, you do have the feeling that you just killed the monster. Look at these adorable illustrations here. What's on the other side? Booyah, the gnomes. But there are also goblins, gates, traps. Again, this is a monster, the Cthulhu kind of monster. And it looks like you did kill the monster because you don't want the monster to get out. And again, different kinds of effects. Some monsters can break doors, some monsters can break walls, some monsters can go through gates. It all depends on the variants that you're playing. The general idea, however, remains the same. You shuffle your deck, but first you take a gate and you place it on the table. Then you shuffle your deck and you draw two cards that are your vault. Also think of them as your hand, meaning you will be allowed to play them from your hand or from your vault to play those cards instead of drawing cards from the deck. Other than that, you take a card and you will place it on the dungeon. Now, if the card is a monster, they don't activate in the first 9 turns. They only activate starting from turn 10. But this one would go. So I draw a card. Once I draw a card, I'm supposed to play it on the board unless I switch it with one of the cards in my vault and I play that one instead. And I decide to do that. And then say this is a monster and it's too early, but then we decide to play that one. When you play the cards, well, the tunnels need to align as much as possible. If you're blocking entirely an open connection with the wall of a card, that's not allowed. You have to try to create those connections. For example, I decide to do it that way. This one I place it that way. So it can be a little bit slanted, it can be at an angle. And then I get this card here and I connect it there, for example. So you see how the dungeon will grow over time. Now, the general idea, what adds to game effects, for example, I think I'm allowed to do that because, see, that passage is still visible there, and from there we're going to do it that way. I haven't closed any passage due to the placement, and if it's illegal, well, too bad, I just found a variant. Doors, very important, because if possible, I want to place then later cards that have monsters. I want to place the monsters behind those doors. Okay, these are dangerous, these are annoying. Maybe I'll place them next to each other because having gates spread around gives the monsters more opportunities to sneak out. Suppose that later in the game I have placed a card with a monster there. So you always play cards from the deck. That's just one thing that you need to do. You play cards from the deck, then you check if there are monsters, you check if they have a way to go to the door. Right now, I'd be okay, to the main gate, I'd be okay because that monster is blocked there. But suppose there is a game effect that breaks that door, or opens that door, now I'm in trouble because that monster will reach that area there. However, you also have a phase, if you place a card, you check if the monsters cause you to lose the game, and after that you have a flip phase in which you can use effects on the board to flip cards. If a card has a gem, like in that case, then you can flip the card to the other side. In this case, for example, say I use the gem and I don't have it anymore. I can flip the card, and by spending a gem, I can flip another card. And that's one way in which you kill the monsters, for example. That way, like so. If I had, say, that gem anywhere in the dungeon, suppose it was right there. Flip it. Booyah. And again, I did what I just showed you there, which is I killed that monster. Goblins, they were the same, but meaning that they can also be flipped, but the difference is that if you flip a card with goblins, all goblins on the board are flipped also, which may be good. Maybe this card here, well, for example, I flip this one that has a gem, and it allows me to flip other cards that also give me something good. For example, this goblin's also flipped down. So the goblins are interesting because they create more chaos. But this is just really the general idea. I don't want to get into all the details of all of the other effects, which can be a little overwhelming and make the game sound more complicated than it is. And the beauty is all those other effects are based on the fact that you can introduce them gradually. You can introduce all those other effects gradually as you play. So place a new card down, possibly switching it with a card from the vault. Check if the monsters cause you to lose the game. Then use flip the card effects, which are again based on cards that have gems. You can also choose to discard a card from the vault, reducing the size of your vault permanently to use a flip the card effect. Take into account other effects that may apply to the mode that you have chosen to play, and you win the game if you're able to either have a perfect dungeon, which is perfectly sealed, no open exits, anywhere, or you're able to place all of the cards that you have decided to play with. Those two situations, you win the game, you lose the game if the monsters escape the dungeon. One kind of card I really wanted to show you because it's really neat is the traps. So you can see the traps will have a side with wires and things ready to spring. If a monster is walking through an area with a trap during the monster phase, then you can spring it and it shows the other side with the trap that has been used. And again, you can use flip the card effects basically to reset the trap. So that's very neat. So generally speaking, this of course is a very simple, humorous game, but for what it is definitely entertaining. It has a massive random element. Of course, it's entirely possible to lose just because of bad draws or, a bunch of bad draws. But after a while, you'll notice that there are certain patterns, certain ways. Once you know how the monsters need to be placed, depending on the side that they're drawn, they need to be placed as close as possible to a gate or as far as possible from a gate. Then you start manipulating things. You do have, even when playing with monsters, which I recommend, that's really the heart of the game, even then you do have a couple of turns in which you are creating your basic foundation for your dungeon before you start adding more crazy stuff. So there are ways of mitigating randomness, but ultimately this is not a game that, you want to, oh my god, I need to perfect it, I need to play optimally because I'm going to the world tournament and blah, 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 blah. It's a light, silly game, but silly in a good way. I'm saying silly. That placement doesn't work. I'm saying silly in a positive way because from time to time, when it's the evening and you just want a simple game that is not too hard, then well, you take out this game. All you need to do to set it up is to shuffle the deck and you start drawing cards. And you're playing a dungeon game with a humorous element, with charming art, and yet with some interesting decisions when you're trying to build your engine of flipping this and flipping that and creating this combo and worrying about this and that thing. Ultimately, it's a game that you're gonna play if you're happy, like laughing out loud because some really crazy situation happened. It's not a game that is so much about, perfect smooth mechanics, but it's about a fun, ridiculous, humorous experience. In that sense, Paperbag Dungeon works very well. It is simple, charming, and enjoyable. Very light for sure, but in that category of like light, play just to see what happens kind of game, definitely a fun option.